Okay. I might bounce around a bit, but just bear with me. I think there's a thread to what it is that I'm going to be talking about. Why I'm standing here is largely because of a 3-year story, really, which I'll tell you. Hopefully, I can manage it in 25 minutes. But fundamentally, my major concern is the disconnect between reality and the narrative. The narrative of what is old in the UK is a narrative of decline. It's a narrative of pessimism. And it's also a narrative of ignorance and overlooking. The predominant story or perception is of over 80s, of a needy individual, of loneliness, isolation, of dementia. And there's very little around the pre-old. So it's looking at the value of older, but not yet old. Typically the 50 to 75 demographic, but we don't like to talk about years because old could be various things to different people. When Professor Lynn Berry, she was the chair of the Commission of the Voluntary Sector and Aging, when she reported back their findings after 18 months of evaluation of the age space in the voluntary sector, in the third sector, she summed it up as being an overwhelming collective lack of imagination, and I'm going to be talking a lot about today. It's not so much the solutions, what it is that people should be doing, but it's the attitude, it's the embracing of change, of innovation, of optimism, of hope, and using a design-led approach in order to discover these opportunities and to rebrand what is in fact older and not yet old in the UK. So a little bit about the story, the 3-year story. I had given up corporate life and had entered in the mobile app industry, looking at how it is that mobile apps can help people with chronic conditions to live their lives better and more independently of the NHS. And came across a tweet from the Design Council, and this is the week that I'd set up my account on Twitter, starting as a social entrepreneur and starting to tweet. And it was an open invitation to express an interest in an innovation challenge that was run by Design Council and funded by the Department of Health. It was called Living Well with Dementia, and even though we were looking at chronic conditions where patients could self-manage, and dementia, particularly as it progresses, is largely managed by proxy by a carer, by a loved one, we thought, well, we can test our inventiveness, and so entered the competition. Anyway, long story short, won the competition. This is 2012. And then realized that there was not that much funding in it, and my partners at the time, they went and did the mobile app thing, and I pioneered alone as a social entrepreneur. And the most important thing about this was not so much the solution that became Trading Times, and it wasn't in the dementia space, and it wasn't in the carer space either. It was in the plus 50 space, looking at creating a skills connecting site, almost like a skills dating model for people who had time, skills, and experience, and how it is that they can make that available to small, medium-sized enterprises in their geography. So that was launched last year. But the most important thing really was the fact that we were required through the facilitation of the Design Council to adopt a design-led approach to the innovation, to the creation. And the design-led approach, coming from a clinical background, was a very, very difficult thing to come to grips with. I thought, as many people do, that design is just graphic design. It's what you see. It's the written design. It's logos and things like that. And so they were saying, are you going to adopt a design-led approach? I say, yes, I'm going to adopt a design-led approach. And that began a 6-month period of arguing, because I, as a doctor, you've got to be right all the time. If you're wrong, you're in trouble. So, you know, just fighting, until I think it was towards the back end of those 6 months, I started to understand what design-led meant. And what it means to me is you don't assume anything. You've got to go into the innovation space, into looking at the big answers to the big questions, and you don't assume. All you do is ask questions, and you open your mind to the responses. And the more people you speak to, and the more answers you get, the richer becomes your understanding of what the big need is and how it is that you might address that. So fast forward to the beginning of last year. So through the piloting, the prototyping, the various grant funds that we needed to raise to get Trading Times launched, we became increasingly adept at design-led thinking. Now, then there's another big pivot point, and that was when we launched it in January last year. The over 50 training timers, as we refer to candidates, flocked to the site. I think in the first 6 months we had 2,000 people in London who joined the site, and their skills were incredible. Their profiles were amazing. But relatively speaking, there were just no employers coming to it. And we couldn't understand it because we'd asked the employers whether they would use it, and they said yes, but when it went live, they just didn't come to the site. So we went back and we asked different questions in different ways, and we realized that ageism and the barriers to entry for people over 50 in the workplace are just almost insurmountable in this country. And we asked what the employers see in their mind's eye when you say we've got an amazing resource pool of people over 50. And they admitted that they see an 80-year-old woman who's in poor health, tech illiterate, can't learn new things, not productive, in need of care, in decline, and what do I need to employ somebody like that for? And yet we went back to the 2,000 people who joined Trading Times, and on average they were 56. And you think about it, the internet's been around 20 years. So they were 36 when the internet, and they've all been working. Their skills were across every category, design, technology. 52% amazingly had a degree, and a further 20% had at least one diploma. So there's a complete disconnect between the perception of what the over 50 demographic is and the reality of what they actually are. So this got us thinking. Trading Times was clearly a valuable service, but it was a service for which there was no market, or there was one half of the market, but you needed two in the exchange. So we thought that we need to do something to wake people up, need to do something crazily bold, daring. A media campaign's not going to do it, a social media campaign's not going to do it, bleating about it's not going to do it. So we thought we need to stage an event. The event is fundamentally going to look at exploring work in an age of no retirement. And it became the Age of No Retirement. And the Age of No Retirement, which started off as a marketing strategy for Trading Times, is now the tail that's wagging the dog. So we've realized that the opportunity for design-led thinking and innovation in a space that is so weighed down by the single three letters that make up the word old. Old thinking, old people, old concepts. And if you think about the tech industry and the modern products and services and their design approach, there's just nothing like that in the age space. So we thought we're going to lead the charge of design and design-led thinking in the age space. So we started, in fact, last week was our first anniversary. On 1st of October last year, we hired the Barge House, which is part of the Oxo Tower. But it's the grotty part of the Oxo Tower. It's got no heating, it's 4 floors, everything peels, the top floor leaks. But the metaphorical beauty is that it's still earning a good revenue, and it's an amazing building. So we took over all the floors and we ran an age-related conference, 2 days. We ran a whole lot of workshops prior to that to identify what the big issues are. We came up with 9 themes and 3 debates in each of those, so there's 27 debates. And we managed in a short space of time to attract 500 people to come over those 2 days, including many corporate people, a lot of people from the design community. And we actually got designers from the Royal College of Arts to facilitate each of the debates. So they weren't subject matter experts. Their challenge was that we wanted new ideas, fresh thinking, radical ideas. We didn't want it to be drowned out by the people in the age space. We wanted to involve everybody, a multi-generational event. And over the course of the 2 days, we collected 50 hours of audio and about 10 kilos of paper and Post-it notes and brown paper and everything else. And it took us 6 weeks to understand what it is that we'd collected. The plenary sessions, which weren't really plenary sessions, just me and George, George Lee is my partner in this. business partner, and Georgina, I should add. And we stood up in front of the audience, which hadn't left, which was amazing, you know, come 4:30 in the afternoon after 2 days. And the applause that we received was amazing. That really was special. And 6 weeks after that, when we published our newspaper, and I've got some copies here, but we published a tabloid-sized newspaper, and by that stage we realized we were onto something, that we were filling a bit of a gap, and there was an opportunity to actually lead a social change in the space. 6 themes emerged. The first one is we've got to change the language. We've got to change the narrative. No more silver, no more golden age, no more all these euphemisms that perpetuate the generational divide. It's just people. And the more we speak about people and what they do, and not the fact that we're amazed that this man who sets out a new business is a grandfather. It's irrelevant. He might be 62, it's fine, but it doesn't have to be a 62-year-old grandfather. It's just what people are doing, and that other people can relate to that. And also stories. We need to be better at storytelling. We need to tell positive stories, stories that people can relate to. Not the story of the 90-year-old marathon runner, but the story of the 65-year-old business startup, whatever, but things that can inspire other people. We need to adopt design and put design at the forefront of change. We need to look at the whole life, 0 to 100, and not a sequence of disconnected life stages. We need to involve all generations in everything we do. Everybody's getting older every day, and the pre-old need to be involved in what it is that they will be inheriting in the future. And work and employment as an increasingly vital part of a long and more fulfilling life. And then last week, which is the last iteration, is that we moved towards the corporate side of things, and we wanted to get big brands involved in 2 ways, and that is they've got an aging workforce, and it's not an aging workforce. It's an aging workforce. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing. I mean, the fact that we're all living longer and healthy has to be a good thing. I mean, we're not saying, you know, give back our extra years. So what it is it that organizations should be doing and thinking about, and not just from their employees, it's also their customers. So their customers are aging, their demographics are aging. Looking at things like the Ford Focus car, the Ford Motor Company, they used inclusive design to develop the Ford Focus. They wanted to make a great drive for every driver. So they wanted to make it easy to get into and out of for an older driver, but it didn't make it an old person's car. It's the best selling car in its class in the world. So it's that kind of principle. The Extra 10 campaign is essentially, if people are now living an extra 10 years in healthy life, in the middle of their life, rather than extra 10 years in poor health tagged on at the end, if everybody's getting an extra 10, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to take up an instrument, go back to school, new language, start a new business, become a social entrepreneur? What are you going to do with your extra 10? If people are living an extra 10, what are big companies going to do with their employee base if they're living an extra 10? If you are living an extra 10, what does that mean for products and services out there who will have the benefit of a customer for another 10 years? Things like the 100-year mortgage, the intergenerational mortgage, that's starting to build on that. So the extra 10 concept lends itself really well to big organizations. They can latch onto it, they can understand it, it's an easy concept, and it encompasses everything. The whole age agenda can be distilled into the extra 10 in a very positive way, because it sounds positive. It's an extra 10. It's not an aging problem. It's not an aging demographic. It's an extra 10. So we started to work last week with big companies, and we've developed with them 8 prototype ideas. We're in the process of writing them up. So we're looking for stories, we're looking for collaborators, essentially. Barclays is a core partner of the Age and No Retirement. They are looking, and there's a few valid examples there, they're looking to mirror their customer profile with their employee profile, so that their customer demographic, where their older customers are their best customers, their wealthiest customers, their longer serving customers, are served by people who are not in their 20s and 30s, served by people who have the empathy, who've had a bank loan, who've been through life's troubles and turmoils and built, had a family, might be grandparents. And so there's that alignment of understanding and that faith. And so they're starting to build that community alignment along generational lines. I mentioned the Ford Focus company. There's also a consultancy that we're working with who had overlooked the value of their recent retirees, their partners who were leaving the firm. The partners were wealthy individuals. They're retiring into very nice pensions, and so the whole focus within the organization, particularly the HR department, was getting the youthful talent in the door, because the millionaires who were leaving, who cares what, they've made their money and they've done well, so good luck to them. Whereas the talent that was leaving on the top end is actually quite incredible. And you think about the way the partnership model works, is that the senior partners are responsible for the sales of the organization and most of the turnover. So the organization was actually outsourcing training methodology, sales training, to a third-party organization that didn't really know anything other than teaching methodology. Whereas the partners who were leaving had hit targets year in, year out, had a network second to none, knew all the tricks of the trade, knew the culture and the values of the organization, inside out. And you think about it from the junior partner's perspective, which training program would they rather go on? This overlaps with how it is that they were preparing their senior partners for retirement. Their senior partner retirement plan was essentially one morning session and say, okay, you're going to be a non-executive director, so here's how to go and find your roles. Instead of saying, this is a modern retirement world, and you're young, they tend to be in their late 50s, and what do you want to do with the rest of your life? You can do startup workshops, you become an entrepreneur, go back to school, all these things that make up a richer retirement. So it's looking at building the retirement plan, and part of that is recycling all those skills, bringing them back in, using them on a flexible part-time basis. That helps with the richness of retirement, as well as keep skills and experience in the firm. So that I think, looking at the 100-year working life, is actually, it touches so many of those things with regards to flexibility and choice. So the age of no retirement, we're hoping to announce some big things in the coming future. We're still very much in our infancy, and we are increasingly attending things like this, and it's really great that Sheila's put this on. It's so encouraging that more and more of these things are happening, because it does require collective effort. I really would not want to see a whole load of micro initiatives that are within organizations that aren't shared, that aren't spoken about. I think the most important thing, and we saw this last week on the first, is that organizations are increasingly willing to collaborate and share on these ideas. And we're only going to learn and influence things positively if the storytelling is made to happen. Without the storytelling, there is no change. Without the increasingly changing print in the broadsheets, and the tabloids, online media, unless that narrative, the language, the stories aren't going to change, then it won't change, and then we'll be stuck with the old thinking. So I think that this kind of initiative we can build on and keep collaborating, keep thinking, and keep designing and inventing. Thank you.